This lecture will focus on Sunnism and Shi'ism. Similar to other religious traditions, there is incredible diversity among Muslims. In an earlier lecture, we talked about some of the different legal schools that developed early on in Islamic history. In addition to Islam's diversity as far as legal matters are concerned, there are also different theological and political schools of thought among Muslims. However, one of the most important and well known differences between Muslims is the difference between the Sunnis and the Shia. Sunnism and Shi'ism are the two major denominations in Islam. In this lecture, we will look at the differences and similarities between the two and how they came to be. We will also look at how these differences have led to regional conflict and tension in different parts of the world. In particular, we will explore who the Sunnis and Shia are, how the sectarian divide occurred, and how Sunnis and Shia are similar and different in their practices, and also we will look at some of the case studies of Sunni-Shia conflict very briefly. So, who are the Sunnis? Sunni Muslims are the largest denomination of Muslims in the world. The term Sunni comes from the phrase Ahl Sunnah or people of the Sunnah. The term Sunnah refers to the normative behavior and practice of Prophet Muhammad. So, in other words, the Sunnis consider themselves followers of the Prophet's practice. You might ask, aren't all Muslims guided by the Sunnah? Yes, that's true. All Muslims are guided by the Prophet's Sunnah, but Sunnis emphasize the importance of the Sunnah or practice of the Prophet as a guide a lot more compared to the Shia. While for the Shia the Sunnah is important, it is often understood through the teachings and guidance of Shia Imams or leaders or religious leaders. So it is a question of emphasis. The term Imam has a particular meaning within the Shia tradition. Most Muslims around the world today are Sunni. Some estimates say that somewhere between 85 and 90% of Muslims in the world are Sunni. Sunnis make up most of the populations of countries like Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. They also form a majority among Muslims in countries like Turkey, India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Sunni Islam itself is very diverse. It is comprised of different theological schools and legal schools. It is also made up of different attitudes and outlooks that have developed from different historical settings and cultural circumstances. So, who are the Shia? The term Shia literally means followers or party or group or associate or supporters. The term Shia refers to those Muslims who take their spiritual inspiration from the Prophet Muhammad's direct descendants. In Arabic, these descendants are referred to as Ahlul Bayt, which literally means people of the house or people of the house of the family of the Prophet. After the Prophet died, those Muslims who are now known as Shia argued that the Prophet's successor should come from his biological descendants. However, those who became Sunnis believed that the successor should be chosen from those who were capable of leading the community, not necessarily from the family of the Prophet. This is the basis for the Shia's belief that leadership of the Muslim community, both spiritual and political, should come from the Prophet's biological line, which Sunnis do not necessarily agree with. The Shia constitute about 10% to 15% of all Muslims. They form the majority in places like Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, and also Azerbaijan. There are also large Shia communities in Afghanistan, India, Lebanon, Pakistan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Many of the most important Shia mosques and holy sites, such as shrines of key Shia figures, can be found in Iraq in places like Karbala and Najaf. There are several different branches of Shia Islam. The three main branches are the Twelvers or Imamis, the Zaydis, and the Ismailis. The Twelver Shia believe that Prophet Muhammad's religious leadership and spiritual authority was passed on to 12 of his descendants. This began with the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, followed by the Prophet's grandsons Hassan and Hussein, who are the sons of Ali and Fatima, the Prophet's daughter. After Hussein died, according to the 12 verse, the leadership or imamate, which is leadership, uh, remained with Hussein's descendants until the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi. This last Imam is believed to have gone into occultation, which means really hidden. Shia Muslims believe this Imam vanished in the 9th century of the Common Era in Iraq after his father was murdered. The Twelver Shia believe that the 12th Imam will return at the end of time. He is the person who will restore justice on earth. Basically, the 12th Imam is a Messiah-like figure. In the absence of the 12th Imam, the religious authorities of the 12th Imam Shia provide religious guidance to the followers on the authority of this Imam. So even though he is not around, he carries important authority. Then there are Shia who are known as Zaydis, who are the followers of Zayd ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein, the great grandson of Imam Ali, who is the first Imam of the Shia. The Zaydis can be found mainly in places like Yemen, but there are smaller numbers in Iraq and in parts of Africa as well. The Zaydis are probably the closest to the Sunnis in terms of their approach to theological and legal matters. Finally, there are the Ismailis, or sometimes those who are referred to as Sevenas. These Ismailis are named after Ismail, the eldest son of the sixth Imam, Ja'far Sadiq. Ja'far Sadiq is considered to be the founder of the main Shia school of law. This school of law is usually known as the Ja'fari school. It is the most important Shia school of law. The Ismailis believe that Ja'far Sadiq's son Ismail was the seventh Imam in the line of succession from Prophet Muhammad, not Ja'far's second son Musa al-Kazim. This means that some Shia followed Ja'far's son Ismail and others followed his son Musa. Those who followed Ismail are known as Ismailis. Those who followed Musa and his descendants are the 12 Imam Shia. The Ismailis are also divided into a number of different groups. These days, the most well-known Ismaili group is the followers of the present Imam Agha Khan. Ismailis are usually known for their symbolic or esoteric interpretations of the Quran and practices. Although the 12 Imam Shia are the most numerous and dominant group today, at certain points in time, the Ismailis were the most dominant Shia group. It was the Ismailis, for example, who founded the Fatimid Empire or Fatimid Caliphate that ruled a large part of North Africa between 909 and 1171 of the Common Era. How did the Sunni versus Shia divide occur in Islam? The divide between Sunnis and Shia occurred quite early in Islamic history. The basic idea that divided Muslims into Sunnis and Shia goes way back to the time of the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Of course, there were no Sunnis or Shia at the time. The concepts of Sunni and Shia developed over a number of decades after the death of the Prophet. After the Prophet's death, even before he was buried, the Muslim community based in Medina had to decide who should succeed him as the leader of the Muslim community. The Prophet was the leader, and with his death, there was a leadership vacuum. This had to be filled immediately. There was a degree of urgency to it. Even before the funeral of the Prophet, some senior members of the Muslim community got together in a meeting place in Medina and began to debate who should be the leader of the community. As we know, in Medina there was a significant Meccan migrant community as well as the Muslims of Medina. So this meeting included leaders from both communities. Some argued that the leader should be from Medina, while others argued that the leader should be from the Meccan community. To cut a long story short, after heated debates, some members present in the meeting supported Abu Bakr from Mecca, one of the closest advisors to the Prophet, as the leader of the community. There were others who disagreed with this choice, but gradually Abu Bakr was given the recognition as the leader in Medina and slowly elsewhere in the Muslim communities. It is important to note that in this meeting there was no presence of the closest family members of the Prophet. In particular, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law Ali was not present in this meeting. He was busy with funeral-related matters. Members of the Prophet's family must have felt that they should have a say in the leadership of the community, but they didn't. Both Ali and his wife, the Prophet's daughter Fatima, had their concerns about how the leadership was settled. But gradually, Ali accepted Abu Bakr's leadership and continued in his role as a key advisor to Abu Bakr and two other caliphs before Ali himself became caliph. This dispute about the leadership of the community at the time of the Prophet's death was the beginning of a division among Muslims that still continues to this day. It was about a political issue, or essentially a political issue. For the Sunnis, the Prophet Muhammad had not named a successor to rule the community after him. So one had to be chosen from those who had the capacity to fulfill that role, that is, the role of leadership. Abu Bakr was nominated in that famous meeting in Medina and was accepted by the rest of the community. Just before Abu Bakr's death, he himself chose Omar, again another well-known advisor to the Prophet and from Mecca, to be his successor. The caliphates of Abu Bakr and Omar operated without major difficulties. The community was generally happy with their performance and did not dispute their rule very much, although there were some who were still keen to see someone from the family of the Prophet, namely Ali, as their leader. It was only after the assassination of the third Caliph Osman that Ali was named leader in 656. Unlike the previous rulers or caliphs, the nomination of Ali was challenged from the very beginning by powerful Muslim groups based in Syria and Iraq, which were part of the then Muslim Caliphate. So at this time, the Muslim community was heavily divided between those who supported Ali's rule and authority and those who challenged him. This led to a series of battles between the forces loyal to Ali and those of his opponents. One of the key opponents of Ali was the governor of Syria, whose name is Muawiyah. Muawiyah, who was originally from a powerful clan in Mecca, became leader of the Muslim community after Ali's death in 661. In fact, Muawiyah was the one who established the Umayyad rule and dynasty. This lasted almost 100 years or so. The Umayyad caliphs ruled from their base in Damascus, Syria. Muawiyah's rule from Damascus lasted almost 20 years. While he managed to rule over the vast territories now controlled by Muslims and was a very shrewd politician, his decision to nominate his son Yazid to be ruler after him created significant problems for the community. Many leading figures of the Muslim community, including those of the family of the Prophet, simply refused to accept Yazid as the caliph or the ruler. This kind of hereditary rule was seen rather foreign to the Arab Islamic culture at the time. It was during Yazid's rule Perhaps the most tragic event for the family of the Prophet and for the Shia occurred. One of the opponents of Yazid was the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, who is the son of Ali. His name is Hussein, or as the Shia refer to him as Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein's challenge to Yazid's rule led to a confrontation between Yazid's forces and Imam Hussein's small group of followers in modern-day Iraq, and the massacre of this group, including Imam Hussein himself, in Karbala in Iraq. To this day, the Shia remember this massacre and the suffering of Imam Hussein. Let us now look at the issue of the dominance of Sunnis over the Shia politically for much of Islamic history. Historically, the Sunnis have almost always ruled over the Shia, that is, for much of Islamic history. While the Sunnis can look back to the glorious history of the four rightly guided caliphs immediately after the death of the Prophet, and the great Muslim caliphates under the Umayyads, Abbasids, and the Ottomans, the Shia have only briefly held political and military power over the Sunnis. There were times when the Shia gained political power. In the Abbasid period, which Abbasids are Sunnis, for example, the Twelvers gained power when the Shia Buyid dynasty took control of Abbasid administration in the 10th and 11th centuries. The Shia Ismailis established a counter-caliphate in North Africa around the same time, from 910, and then conquered Egypt in 969. However, the Ismaili Caliphate, or what we know as the Fatimid Caliphate, was brought an end by Salah ad-Din, or Saladin as known in Europe, in 1171. Salah ad-Din is the famous Muslim general who fought against Christian crusaders from Europe and took back Jerusalem from the Christians. Later, Twelver Imam Shia went on to found the Safavid Persian state in the 16th century. Its legacy can still be found in Iran today. The main rival to the Safavid Empire was the much larger Ottoman Empire to the west, which was predominantly Sunni. The Ottoman Empire was a dominant world power for many centuries, until it started to fragment and was eventually dissolved in the 20th century by Kemal Atatürk. Kemal Atatürk established the secular Republic of Turkey in 1923. This brief survey shows that the tension between Sunnis and Shia at a state and political level has continued throughout Islamic history. Let us now look at the issue of the end of the caliphate and the debates that. For the Sunnis, the Ottoman Empire was really the last Sunni caliphate. Since the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century, Sunni Muslims have found themselves without any recognizable political institution or authority to unify them, even symbolically. The loss of the caliphate has generated heated debates among Muslims in the 20th century about whether there is a need for Muslims, particularly Sunni Muslims, to establish a caliphate in the modern period, particularly after World War II, when many Muslim majority states were formed. In the midst of the nation states today, some would believe that it is questionable as to whether a caliphate is even possible today. This is an issue we will look at in a later lecture. The idea of a caliphate is alive in modern-day Sunni Muslim movements and can be seen at the heart of movements like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Hizb ut-Tahrir. In the context of debates about establishing a caliphate or an Islamic state in the 20th century, it was the revolution led by Imam Khomeini of Iran that led to the creation of the Shia Islamic State in Iran. The idea of an Islamic State has been championed by many Sunni religious figures and movements in the 20th century. But this idea of an Islamic State perhaps was first realized by the Shia in Iran. After Khomeini's revolution, Iran underwent major changes to its political, legal, educational, and other systems. This was partly to transform Western influenced systems into Islamic systems, according to Khomeini and his followers' interpretation of Islam. Since its establishment in 1979, it is the only major Shia state governed by religious leaders whose fatwas or Islamic legal opinions have the weight of enforceable law. So that is a bit of the history of the division between Sunni and Shia Muslims. It shows how the original dispute over the Prophet's successor led to the establishment of Sunnis and Shia over time, in fact, over the first 2 to 3 centuries of Islam. Let us now look at the issue of how Sunnis and Shia are similar and how they're different in their basic beliefs and practices. Let us look at the similarities first. You may be wondering how the Sunnis and Shia are similar and how they're different in terms of religious belief and practices. After all, aren't they both Muslim? Of course, the Sunnis and Shia are both Muslim, but they have somewhat different interpretations of Islam. Not so much about the very basic and fundamental practices and beliefs. On these, they both agree, but they disagree on many other issues. First, let us look at the similarities, or at least some similarities. Both Sunnis and Shia revere the Quran. It is the same Quran that they both recite and follow in Arabic. There is no Shia Quran or Sunni Quran. They both believe that Prophet Muhammad was the messenger of God. They both follow the other 4 pillars of Islam. For instance, they both fast during Ramadan. They both observe the 5 daily prayers. They both give to the needy and disadvantaged and for other such purposes. And they both commit to the pilgrimage to Mecca if one is financially and physically able to do so. Within both branches of Islam, there are followers who range from nominal or very secular in their approach to fundamentalist or extremist in their approach to religion, law, and interpretation. So many of the fundamental aspects of their beliefs and practice are exactly the same, but there are some differences too. Let us now look at some examples of how Sunnis and Shia are different. These are just examples. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, and they are not in a particular order. Firstly, in terms of prayer, many Shia will only pray 3 times a day, but perform 5 prayers. They combine some of the prayers instead of praying 5 times a day. There are also slight differences in the movements they perform in the prayer. For instance, the Shia will stand with their hands at their sides, while most Sunnis put their hands on their stomach or chest. The call to prayer is also slightly different. Some phrases that are used in the Sunni call to prayer are not used in the Shia's call to prayer, and vice versa. The Shia also have a more elaborate and structured religious hierarchy than the Sunnis. Sunnis do not have a central human religious authority as such after the Prophet Muhammad. The Shia endow their religious leaders with greater status than Sunni Muslims do, which means the Shia revere or venerate their religious leaders or imams and give them a higher status than other human beings. After an important Shia religious leader has passed away, it is quite common for a shrine to be built over the place where they were buried, so that believers can pay respects or even pray to them. It is quite common for Shia Muslims to pray to Ali or his son Hussein, for example, asking them to intercede on their behalf before God. For example, a Shia hymn says, "It is not strange that man, through servitude to Ali, will reach God." Many Sunni Muslims would consider such ideas and practices as completely unacceptable. In the Shia tradition, the graves and tombs of key religious figures are venerated. Many Sunnis often consider veneration to be a symbol of what is called shirk in Arabic. This is a term that refers to the idea of associating other beings with God. It is considered one of the greatest sins in Islam. As far as visiting graves are concerned, both Sunnis and Shia visit graves, and there is no particular problem with that. but it is the degree of veneration of the saints or holy figures or religious authorities, that is the imams, in the Shia tradition that is often criticized by many Sunnis, especially if they pray to the imam or the saint as if they are praying to God. This is, of course, not just an issue within the Shia tradition. There are Sunnis who venerate what they consider to be holy figures or saints. In many cases, other Sunnis severely criticize such practices. In the modern period, Sunnis, who are often referred to as Salafis or sometimes Wahhabis, have focused on the issue of the veneration of saints in a big way. You may have heard of the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, supporters destroying or bombing shrines in places like Libya or Iraq. The destruction of shrines by these groups like ISIS is just one example of the tension that exists between Sunnis and Shia today. In terms of other differences, in Shia mosques, the names of Shia imams and other members of the family of the Prophet are often written in beautiful calligraphy. In Sunni mosques, it is common to see the names of God, the Prophet, other prophets, or names of the first four caliphs written as an art form or in calligraphy. In some Shia mosques or Islamic centers, photos of Shia religious leaders like Imam Khomeini can be found. But in Sunni mosques, you would not find photos or paintings of human beings. As I mentioned previously, both Sunni and Shia Muslims follow their own distinct schools of law and theology, which means there are many differences in doctrine, opinions, and schools of thought. The Shia, particularly the Ismailis, tend to be more esoteric in their beliefs and often look to metaphoric readings of the Quran. Sunnis and Shia also have different views about leadership of the community. According to the Shia, Prophet Muhammad chose Ali as his successor and leader before his death. The Shia believed that the leadership of the community was transferred from Imam Ali, the first Shia Imam, to his descendants. The Shia believed that Prophet Muhammad should have been succeeded by his family, beginning with Ali and then each successor. This is called the Imamate, from the word Imam. This means one of the most important features of Shi'ism is the idea that Ali's kingship with the Prophet Muhammad gave him special status. Ali is considered by Shia to be a more righteous and better leader than the first three caliphs. The Shia do not consider the caliphates of the first three caliphs, that is Abu Bakr, Omar, and Usman, to be legitimate. The Sunnis believe that while Ali was a righteous leader, his kinship to Prophet Muhammad did not necessarily give him superior status. This means the entire concept of the imamate, or as understood by the Shia, is questioned by the Sunnis. The Shia view of the first three caliphs as not legitimate is a point of tension between the Sunnis and Shia. Of course, there would be many Shia today who would not actually question the legitimacy of the first three caliphs, or at least they would not express that in those terms. But this is an issue that goes way back to the history and continues to be a significant problem for Sunni-Shia relations. The Shia believe that the Shia Imams have special power granted to them by God. The most important is that they have superior knowledge of the religion and in their interpretation of Islam. Because these Imams, that is the Shia Imams, are divinely selected, they can interpret the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet better than others, according to Shia belief. Other special powers have also been attributed to Shia Imams. 12 Shia believe that the 12 Imams of the 12 Imam Shi'ism are infallible. This is called the notion of Ma'sumiyya, which means infallibility in Shi'ism. The tendency among Shia to exaggerate the status of the family of the Prophet, in particular the Shia Imams, is referred to as extremism or ghulub in Arabic by many Sunni Muslims. This does not mean that the Sunni Muslims do not love or revere the family of the Prophet. they do. The problem from a Sunni point of view is that perhaps there's an exaggeration in the veneration of the Shia Imams within Shia tradition. And again, this is a point of difference between Sunnis and Shia. Let us now look at the issue of governance or leadership and a modern Shia example of this. We will look at Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini and his idea of the guardianship of the jurists. Khomeini is a key figure in 12 Imam Shi'ism who developed this theory of guardianship of the jurists, or wilayatul faqih in Arabic. For Khomeini, the government is an essential component of Islam, and Sharia law cannot be fully implemented without an Islamic state. According to Khomeini, Islamic government is the only legitimate tool for putting the Islamic rules and values into practice in Muslim societies. Muslims cannot live under non-Islamic rule, nor can implementation of the Sharia be stopped during the occultation of the 12th Imam, as Khomeini believed. To ensure that the law is correctly applied during the occultation of the 12th Imam, the state should be governed by the most qualified and learned jurist, Khomeini argued. Khomeini considered jurists to be the only legitimate successors of the Prophet and the infallible Imams. This means that it is their duty not only to interpret the Quran and the Sunnah, but implement Islamic law as well. Khomeini also rejected the idea that a jurist's task is limited to understanding and interpreting the Sharia. Their duty is to implement the law and to rule the country, he argued. This theory of the rule of the jurist, or the guardianship of the jurist, is a rather unique idea developed by Khomeini. It is the basis on which modern-day Iran is governed. There, religious leaders and jurists hold an enormous amount of power. This idea of Khomeini was objected to by various Shia jurists, as it was not in line with traditional Shia ideas about governance. Let us now look at the issue of Sunni versus Shia sectarian conflict and some of the tensions today. Unfortunately, there continues to be a deep divide between Sunni and Shia Muslims in many parts of the world today. In some places, the rivalry and mistrust that developed early on in Islamic history has deteriorated to conflict and bloodshed today. In many places where the two groups live side by side, such as in Lebanon, Iraq, and Pakistan, their dislike and even hatred of each other is stronger than towards other religions. This can be seen in recent events in Iraq and Lebanon, for example. The tension between the two groups is not just a theoretical issue, but has implications for the everyday life of many Muslims around the world. Open conflict between Sunnis and Shia has occurred and are occurring in a number of countries, such as Pakistan and Afghanistan. Extremist groups among Sunnis attack Shia mosques, processions, and individuals, and this has become common with the growing influence of movements like ISIS, or the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and groups like Taliban. In Afghanistan, the Shia, especially the Hazara tribes from the central and northern parts of the country, have suffered persecution, exploitation, and even death at the hands of hardline Sunni tribes. In Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and especially Iraq, there have been numerous sectarian motivated suicide and car bombings by both Shia and Sunnis against each other. Let us now look at the reality of these divisions, that is Sunni-Shia division, in a couple of different countries. First, Lebanon. There's only one country in the Muslim world where Sunnis and Shia live roughly in equal numbers, that is Lebanon. Lebanon is an interesting country. There are about 2.5 million Muslims there. Just over half the population are either Sunni or Shia, half of the Muslim population. It also has a large Christian population, plus smaller Druze and Alawi communities. There are also about 500,000 or so Palestinian refugees who reside in the country who are predominantly Sunni. So it is quite a religiously diverse country. Lebanon is interesting because of the way its government is structured, which recognizes the very large religious communities that reside in the country. The National Pact of 1943, which was set down at independence, which is really the basic foundation of the state, of Lebanon as a state, divides political authority among the largest communities. The Maronite Christians have been given the office of presidency of the republic. The Sunnis hold the position of prime minister, and the speaker of parliament is held by the Shia. So each community has a political leader that represents them at a very high level in the state. Despite this, there is still a very strong divide between the Sunni and Shia populations in Lebanon. The majority of each group live separately from each other. Sunnis can be found on the western slope of Mount Lebanon, from Beirut to the Syrian border in the north, while most Shia live further south. There are some places in Lebanon where both Sunnis and Shia live, but they rarely live in the same settlements. In the capital city Beirut, Sunnis and Shia live in different parts of the city. In the parts of the city where the two groups have contact or close contact, there have been instances of violence and conflict. Not always, but sometimes. Despite pleas from the religious leadership of Sunni and Shia and Druze for reconciliation and an end to hostilities, tensions still continue. Let us now look at the case of Iraq and Bahrain very briefly. In Iraq and Bahrain, where the Sunni and Shia conflict has also been violent, the situation is very different to that of Lebanon. Both Iraq and Bahrain have a long history of Sunnis ruling over the Shia majority. They both have a record of foreign powers intervening to change this. The majority Shia population of Iraq has been ruled by the minority Sunnis from the very beginning of modern Iraq. In Iraq, the American-led invasion in 2003 allowed the Shia majority to gain political power, but there are still ongoing issues and tensions between the Sunnis and Shia in Iraq. In Bahrain, the majority of the population are Shia, while a minority is Sunni. The Sunnis do rule Bahrain. Various attempts by the Shia majority to overthrow the ruling Sunni elite have not been successful. The movements to overthrow governments in places like Egypt and Tunisia during the Arab Spring also moved the Shia in Bahrain to try again to overthrow the governing Sunni minority, but they were unsuccessful. The government responded with harsh measures against the Shia majority, putting several prominent opposition leaders in prison. Let us now look at the tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Iran are the dominant Sunni and Shia powers respectively in the Middle East. Tensions between the two countries have increased significantly during the past few decades, especially after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. With the successful revolution by Khomeini in Iran, fears spread throughout the Middle East that Khomeini's revolution would be exported to other parts of the Middle East, increasing the political power of the Shia in various countries and perhaps even destabilizing them. This fear was probably at the heart of tensions between Sunni-led countries like Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran in the 1980s onwards. One of the most recent events which contributed to the increase of tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia was the execution of Saudi Shia religious leader Sheikh Nimr in 2016. Sheikh Nimr had advocated for greater political rights for Shia in Saudi Arabia and surrounding countries. Saudi Arabia accused him of inciting violence against the state and executed him. Iran strongly condemned this. The eastern part of Saudi Arabia is predominantly Shia. This is also where a lot of oil fields of Saudi Arabia are located, and therefore the issue of influence of Iran on Shia is a sensitive issue for the Saudis. Saudi Arabia and Iran often take opposing sides in conflicts in the region. For example, in Yemen, the Shia rebels from the north, called Houthis, overthrew the government, leading to efforts to counter the Houthis by a Saudi-led coalition in 2015. The Houthis are believed to be supported by Iran. In Syria, the Alawi Shia sect, followed by the Assad family, has ruled the country for most of the last 50 years. During the Syrian civil war, Iran supported the Assad regime, while Saudi Arabia supported the rebels and opposition forces. Again, this represented the Sunni-Shia split. In Iraq, Iran has supported the Shia-led government and was involved in efforts to destroy the Islamic State, or the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, when it occupied some parts of the country after 2014. It is important to note that not all these regional conflicts, especially the conflicts between Iran and Saudi Arabia, are because of religious differences. Many other political issues also contribute to the tensions between the two. So, in summary, the Sunnis and Shia represent the two major denominations of Islam. This division occurred in the early years of Islamic history, and the basic idea goes right to the time of Prophet Muhammad's death, when the early Muslim community sought to appoint a successor to the Prophet. This early division continues to have ramifications today. Each denomination, while sharing the fundamentals of Islam, has developed different legal schools and religious practices, as well as theological schools. In some parts of the world, differences exacerbated by local political issues have often led to violent conflict that has caused many deaths and destruction of important religious sites. This tension between the Sunnis and Shia around the world is a significant issue and problem for Muslims and, of course, for the global community today.
Thanks for watching. We hope this deepened your understanding of Islam. Be sure to check out the other videos in this series. Keep exploring. Don't forget to subscribe.